Boy, did the New York Mets need that win on Thursday night. They avoided losing 4 games in a row for the first time all season by beating the Pirates. The Bats woke up. Carlos Carrasco was brilliant. We'll be discussing that on the show today. Also, the Port St. Lucie Mets having a run in the playoffs. We'll talk about them for a Friday Farm Report, and Sandy Alderson on his way out. So much to discuss on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. The game started off on a good note for the Mets on Thursday. Carlos Carrasco picks up 3 strikeouts in the first inning. The Mets bats come up, and early you're thinking, here we go again. Couple of strikeouts to lead off the game. Are the Mets going to have another one of those down offensive performances as they were just reeling off of that sweep against the Cubs? But the bats woke up early. Jeff McNeil gets a knock. Another multi-hit game for McNeil. An incredible stat that Matthew Brownstein tweeted out during the game, that McNeil had his 154th multi-hit game, and in doing so, he tied David Wright when it comes to career multi-hit games with the Mets, now only trailing Mookie Wilson and Jose Reyes were the two ahead of them. So that is remarkable, and it shows how incredible this guy is, because you're talking about such a small sample size of his career compared to those other guys who played for the Mets for so much longer. One of the best hitters this franchise has ever produced. Honestly, that's how good he is. And the fact that there was fans who didn't want him back on the Mets this season still rubs me the wrong way. But McNeil got a rally going early with 2 outs. Pete Alonso got a knock as well. Then Daniel Vogelbach finally gave the Mets some production from that DH spot, doubling both of them home. 2-0 Mets. Now, Carrasco did give up a run in the second, but that's all he would yield from there. And the Mets really stretched the lead in that third inning. And it was Francisco Lindor on Roberto Clemente Day. The native Puerto Rican comes through with a couple of milestones, hitting his 24th home run of the season. He set a single-season franchise record for a Mets shortstop with that home run, breaking his Drupal Cabrera's mark of 23 homers. And on top of that, he set a new career high with 94 RBIs, 6 away now from the first 100 RBI season of his career. I imagine he will get there. And that was not all that inning, because Jeff McNeil just talked about him. This is where he got that multi-hit game. He doubled, Pete Alonso singled. It was a line drive that McNeil was not able to score on because they had to wait to make sure it would make it through the outfield. But that put a runner 90 feet away for Daniel Vogelbach. And he did it again. He got a knock, got a base hit. That drove in McNeil, a 3-run inning for the Mets, and they were able to really cruise from there. In the 4th inning, we actually saw another rally and another RBI by a Mets DH. Brandon Nimmo drew a walk. Pete Alonso was intentionally walked after a couple of outs. Nimmo was on second base. First base was vacant. So they walk Alonso. That led to a left-on-left situation with a lefty reliever coming on for the starter. So what do the Mets do? They go to Mark Vientos instead of Darren Ruff. He comes on to face the lefty, gets himself into a good count, 3-1, shoots a single the other way. First career hit for Mark Vientos, drives in a run on top of it, and the Mets from there were absolutely cruising. And Carlos Carrasco, the real MVP of this game, because while we look at the lineup and, there was multi-hit efforts from Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, Vogelbach was 2 for 2 with the 3 RBIs. Lindor had the homer. Still, I think the Mets left some some meat on the bone offensively. They were 4 for 13 with runners in scoring position, those hits coming early in the game. They left 10 men on base. They could have scored more in this game, but it was Carlos Carrasco that deserves all of the credit here. Wins his 15th game of the year. I know we don't love wins the way we used to as a statistic, but man, has this guy just given the Mets so many outings this year where he just takes the ball, gives them some length, and gives them a chance to win. In this one, allowed just 4 hits, 1 earned run, walked 2, struck out 11. The changeup was nasty. The split was nasty. He is a really solid pitcher, very similar to what I was talking about with Jeff McNeil, where you're looking back to the offseason and how people really gave up on this guy. Now you see his value. And I think as we shift gears and think towards the playoffs, you got to imagine that Carlos Carrasco will be in that playoff rotation. I just can't see any way around that. The other options are Taijuan Walker. I think David Peterson, with that outing against the Cubs in a big spot where the Mets needed him to be a stopper, basically forfeited any opportunity to start a postseason game. Now it looks like he's going to get some work out of the bullpen anyway. Maybe see if he can be a left-handed reliever for the Mets. So with Scherzer coming back, Peterson's not from the rotation as is, and there's really no other options you would look at. It's either going to be Taijuan Walker or Carlos Carrasco that could grab that 4th spot in a playoff rotation, with the first 3 being obvious with DeGrom, Scherzer, and Chris Bassett. And I think Carrasco's the guy. He's the vet in this situation. But you look at his season, and he has given up 4 earned runs or more on 6 occasions. Other than that, 20 of his 26 starts, it's 3 earned runs or less. Just gives you a chance to win. And to look at the season numbers now, he actually just hit with this start that inning vesting option on his contract. Once he had 140 innings pitched, I believe, let me make sure I'm not talking out of school here because I believe I am correct on this one. He now has a vesting option for next season that the Mets will have to either pick up or buy out, if I'm not mistaken. Let's look. $14 million option. Actually, it's 170 innings. I thought it was 140. All right. So he still has a ways to go. This is why you fact check yourself live on Locked On Mets. 30 innings left. 3 more starts. I guess he won't get there, but the Mets can still pick up that option, I believe, if they want to, and bring Carlos Carrasco back. And honestly, the way he has pitched, I think that they should try to work some way to bring him back, maybe even at a lower number. But man, Carrasco has been so good this season and just been very stable for them. I mean, to take the ball 26 times after an injury-plagued year, you have to give him a ton of credit for that. And like I said, I imagine he would be starting either game 4 of an NLDS, or unfortunately, if the Mets were to fail to win the division, if they can make it through that first round, depending on how many games you play, if they lose 1 game in the wild card round, it goes to a 3-game series that they could win. You could be looking at Carlos Carrasco starting at game 1 of a division series. And that is why the onus is on the Mets to win this division. And that's what I want to talk about next here. This is it, folks. We got a weekend series here. 3 more games to watch against this Pirates team that the Mets just have to capitalize on moving forward. But this is your stretch run. And I want to really reflect on that. The fact that we're getting what any fan would want, which is meaningful September baseball, 2 teams going head to head. It's the best race in the sport. We will go over that in just a minute. But first, betonline.net is your number 1 source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts. BetOnline is also your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, MLB, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time just reflecting on where we're at in the season with this division race before we get into the big news of the day, which is Sandy Alderson, who will be stepping down as the team president, and also the Port St. Lucie Mets going to a championship. So that's really cool. We'll talk about that as a Friday Farm Report. But here we are. Yesterday, as doom and gloom, as depressed of an episode as I had all season, I was at a loss after that sweep in such embarrassing fashion. But one of the things I said on the show is sometimes you need to go in the wrong direction to go in the right one. And we can't take too much away from one game. This was a game against a team that has 55 wins all season. They're 55-89. It's a bad baseball team. It was really surprising the Mets even lost the game to the Pirates in their last series, but it's also surprising they got swept by the Cubs. The Cubs are much better than the Pirates. So this is an even easier matchup this weekend. So I'm not trying to look at a single victory against a bad team and say, hey, they're fixed. Because there's a lot that needs to happen. And I think going into this game over the Mets' last 32, they were 16-16. They have to be better than that. They have to find a way to close this season strong. And we've discussed the thought process this week of Pete Alonso after carrying the team to the finish line. And you could say the same thing about Francisco Lindor. It's everybody. Everyone's got to step up. They're about to get Scherzer back. That's going to be great. But here we look at where they are. They just won their 90th game this season, which does not happen often for this franchise. You want them to get to 100, and they got 17 left. So a 10-7 finish, 100 wins is doable. But I don't even know if 100 wins you this division. The Braves right now are sitting at 88-55. So you could say, yeah, the Mets are game up. The Braves also have 2 games in hand. So the Braves still have the opportunity to win those extra games and pull right even with the Mets, theoretically, right? So it's not as simple as, hey, the Mets have a game lead. It's a little bit less than that. It's almost like these teams are dead even. And coming down the stretch, that's thrilling. Look around baseball at the other races. The American League wild card, you're basically trying to see who of that mix is going to be seated where, but you basically know who the teams are going to be. You look at the National League, the NL West decided, literally. The Central, all but decided. The Brewers, could they maybe knock off the Padres? Potentially, but it's looking like it'll be whoever doesn't win the division in the East, the Phillies, and then most likely the Padres, if not the Brewers. A little bit of a race there, but really the only race that matters right now that has a little bit of intrigue as we get to this final push in this season is Mets Braves. And while that is anxiety inducing every single night that you watch the Braves and you think, are they going to win again? And every time the Mets falter, you get that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. But how much better is that than being in September and having no hope, having no shot at all, looking and trying to do the math on, okay, well, the Mets are 5.5 back with 17 to play. If they just won 15 out of 17, no, they control their destiny at this point. Scherzer's coming back. So you should have something that we haven't seen very much of this season, which is a completely healthy starting rotation where you will have Max Scherzer, Jacob deGrom, Chris Bassett, Carlos Carrasco, and Taijuan Walker. Your bullpen is getting more and more full, and we're seeing some better performances from guys like Michael Givens. And knowing that Seth Lugo's been good for a little bit now, you have Adam Ottavino, you have Edwin Diaz, you could have Tyler McGill and Drew Smith coming back, and all of these guys will be fighting to grab a spot in the playoff bullpen. I think there might still be a little bit of a run in this Mets team in the regular season. Obviously, you get to October, everything's washed away. You just have to try to make it through that second season and come out victorious. And they have the horses in the rotation to do it. I'd like to see a little winning streak, though. I'd like to see the Mets go out and reel four in a row against this Pirates team, go into Milwaukee, play a little bit of spoiler on their playoff dreams as they continue to try to close out this division and really make a push against this Braves team and make this a race. And you know what? The Braves are up for it. The Braves might just be winning every night too. But I would much rather see these two teams win until they face each other head to head than what we've watched the last week, where the Braves were losing on the West Coast and the Mets couldn't get out of their own way. So hopefully this game is a sign of better things to come. And for the rest of this series, one of the things I said going into the preview yesterday, win one of these first two with Carrasco and Taijuan Walker, and then you put yourself in the same position you were in the last time you faced the Pirates, where it's all right, Bassett and DeGrom go win a series against a bad team. I think now you got a gravy game with Taijuan Walker on the hill against Mitch Keller. Mets can certainly win that. They can always beat this team that the Pirates can put forth. And then you got your opportunity to really put your foot on their throat and also to continue to create that separation against the Braves. So I don't want to call it a must sweep 4-game series, but it's certainly a must win. You got to take 2 or 3 this weekend, and hopefully you grab that third game as well and start to put some pressure on the Braves, who are a good baseball team that's going up against the Phillies. And we'll see how Philadelphia fares there. You're a Phillies fan this weekend if you're a Mets fan. That's the way it works, which is always a very weird thing to say. But today is Friday, as you're listening to us or watching this. So Friday Farm Report, Port St. Lucie Mets, a lot going on there. And Sandy Alderson was the big news of the day. So I want to touch on that before we close out the show for the week. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. The St. Lucie Mets are heading to the Florida State League Championship Series. They swept their series against the Palm Beach Cardinals, taking the second game in a row on Thursday. And there is a few guys that stood out. First of all, you got Kevin Parada with the game-winning RBI. Very cool for him to go from college player drafted right into some meaningful minor league baseball games. Obviously, it's Low-A, but it's important all the same. And Kevin Parada in a big spot in the 6th inning after the Mets got off to a rough start where they gave up 2 runs in the second. Calvin Ziegler was not great in his start, got knocked out of the game in that second. The Mets, though, held on from there. They get to the 6th inning down by 2, and they're able to rally. You have some walks, very typical minor league baseball, some bad pitching, wild pitches, score a couple runs. Regardless, Parada comes up in a big spot, gets a clutch hit to put the Mets ahead. And the guy you really got to talk about in this game is Joel Diaz. He goes 6 innings out of the pen, allows just 3 hits, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts. You look at his numbers on the season, they don't pop out in a good way. 16 appearances, 10 games started, 55 in a third innings pitch, 51 strikeouts, a 5.86 ERA, and a 1.57 whip. But he's 18 years old, one of the most talented pitching prospects in this farm system. So early on in his career, we have no idea where he'll end up. But the fact that he took the ball in a playoff game and watch the celebration on Twitter and said these games don't matter to these guys. They do matter. There's stakes attached. And Joel Diaz to strike out 11 and to turn in his best performance of the season when the stakes are high, that is a pretty nice endorsement of what his potential can be at, again, only 18 years old. He was born in 2004. That blows my mind. 2004, I was, 9? Getting to the point where some of these guys, I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. Crazy. 2004 birthday. If that makes me feel old, I don't know how it makes some of you feel, but Joel Diaz, a great performance. And it's good to see your minor league teams show out in these type of settings. The games in minor league baseball sometimes can feel insignificant, but you get to these type of playoff atmospheres. And again, it's not like there's a huge crowd in the stands, but just knowing that it's the playoffs, knowing that there's some stakes. I'll tell you, it's like any competitive baseball you can play. If you were in the Little League playoffs, and I'm not talking about Little League World Series, I'm talking about your typical Little League playoffs, you might just have the parents in the stands, but those games mattered. I remembered as a kid. Travel baseball tournaments, you had, for us, the normal seeding games, and then you got into, once the brackets were seeded, the playoff games of that tournament to decide who would be victorious and come out on top. And those games always felt heightened. So you can see the adrenaline tick up, the intensity tick up, and the pressure makes diamonds. And on this roster, if you're looking at all the prospects on the St. Lucie Mets, a couple of the most promising ones came through with Parada and Diaz. Now, the guy that has been part of drafting so many Mets and has been in charge of this front office for so long, Sandy Alderson, is stepping down. That's where we closed the show this week. We all knew this was going to come eventually. Alderson came back after he was, I don't know what you want to call it, unceremoniously let go in the middle of battling cancer. It was a very weird departure when he first left the Mets. They go to the GM triumvirate, if you remember, in the 2018 season. Alderson essentially falls on his sword for all the other people in the front office, takes the blame on his way out, and I always give him a lot of credit for that. When he came back, though, I had mixed feelings about it. Uh, you know, better than Brody Van Wagenen for sure, but you don't necessarily want Sandy Alderson making your baseball ops decisions. And you could say he had no factor in them, but he did still have some of a say, and he had Cohen's ear, and I think he was still involved. So it's good to see him take a more of a backseat advisory role, and it opens the door for a different president to step in. And that's a story that we're going to cover more in the offseason than now. But I will say, if the Mets don't get where they want to go, I would imagine they'll be a little more aggressive with who they try to bring in that spot. They're already doing some interviews right now that I'm sure are preliminary, because maybe you can see if you could talk to a David Stearns for that president of baseball ops role. Would he be open to that? Would the Brewers let him interview for that? Same discussion we had over a year ago now, but I think that it's good that the Mets will be moving past the Sandy Alderson era. I know there's some people that hate Sandy. There's a few that love him. I do still believe that Sandy Alderson gave us the best little pocket of baseball post, obviously the Madoff scandal, but really just of that Will Pond era. He found a way to make that team competitive. He really did bring in a lot of great people that are still in the organization as far as scouting is concerned, and the Mets have hit on a lot of their draft picks since Alderson was brought into this franchise. So I give him credit for that. But I do think that it's good that they turn the page to a new era of baseball and move beyond Sandy Alderson. But big weekend for the New York Mets. Let's see if they do it against this Pirates team. I will be back on Monday, and actually all next week I will be in Orlando. The nephews are going to Disney World for the first time here, so I will be not in this home studio I got. On the road, we'll go audio only on YouTube, but we will still give you your 5 shows a week till I get back on the following Monday. That's going to be all, though. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.